right now, I'm just going to read from Tuesday's New York Times some of the data. 37% of the nation's fatalities from the coronavirus are in long-term care facilities. And in 15 states, long-term care accounted for more than half of COVID-19 deaths. And so nursing homes are like this petri dish for spreading disease. And there's a nice quote, my colleague Phil Sloan, who I did a lot of conferences with, he likens nursing homes to cruise ships and prisons. Rosalie Kane, one of my mentors, likened nursing homes to a cross between a hospital and a poorhouse. And that is the truth. And I've worked 20 years to try and change the culture of nursing homes and the model of long-term care. So there are some things that are very important. And when I look back at all the people I've known in nursing homes, one of the things they have in common is quite often they did not have their end-of-life preferences well documented, well disseminated, and up to date. You know, if you knew that after you had CPR that you would be functioning at maybe 1/3 your capacity before you had your heart attack, or if you're one of those people who say, I've taken care of everything, I've got the green post form on the refrigerator, that's not necessarily something that anybody's going to look at if you're in the middle of a heart attack. Especially if you call 911, or if anybody calls 911, they'll get there and they're going to assume that you want to be resuscitated. So it's far more subtle and complex than that. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. But this is a time when a lot of people are going over their wills, and there are a lot of good websites for useful documentation. And it's more than just your living will, which is the combination of your directive to physicians and your durable power of attorney for healthcare. So there's two parts. There's what you want under what circumstances, and there's who gets to say so. And one of the mistakes people make is they designate, for example, their spouse or an adult child who may or may not be trusted to make these decisions when you're in the hospital on a ventilator and they want to put you on dialysis, and they think, oh, I'll do anything to save my beloved spouse or my beloved mother. And so it's really good to have a designated team as well as a plan C, someone who can be there in case your decision makers cannot. And there's some very good documentations, quality of life statements, where you really designate, do you want to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair? And there's no wrong answers. I mean, of course, some people want full code. Right now at this stage of my life, call 911. I do want to be resuscitated. I don't, however, want to be put on a ventilator. So there's all these nuances, and it's a complicated conversation to have with your friends and family. And you have to include everyone, because if your neighbors don't know what you want, they're going to call 911. And if you've called 911, regardless of all the paperwork you've got all over the house, all over your medical care providers, they're still going to take action, because the default position is to do everything, especially in this country. So do you have questions about that? I know a lot of you have done workshops on end-of-life documentation. Are there any questions on that? Because there's one thing that I fear, and that is dementia, especially the fact that once you have been diagnosed with dementia, you're incompetent. So you can't do any new paperwork. You have to get all your paperwork done while you are cognitively intact. And you can decide, like I know people who have had a good quality of life in end-stage dementia, and I know people who have had a horrible quality of life in end-stage dementia. There will be people, spoon feeding me in a nursing home unless it's very clear in my documentation. If I don't recognize my immediate family members, for example, don't feed me, just stop feeding me. And that's a highly individual choice, and something you really have to discuss with the people closest to you and make sure they understand what you want. 85% of people in nursing homes are in some stage of dementia. And while dementia isn't something that everybody gets, indeed, even after the age of 90, age being the major risk factor, you still have way less than half of the people have any state of dementia. So it's not inevitable, nor is ending up in a nursing home. So that was one of the things I just wanted to bring up first, because so often it gets left to the last and nobody wants to talk about it. So talk about it. It's not easy. I brought my end of life documentation to Thanksgiving for my family and made sure everybody had a copy, and made sure everybody had a blank copy so that they knew what I wanted and they could tell me what they wanted. And that's not easy to do. I'm a lot of fun at parties, but not that Thanksgiving. So that's one of the 7 things you can do. What's another one? Oh, you're all muted. Okay. I wonder if raise your hand. Does anybody have another one that they want to contribute? Jim. Oh, I can't unmute you. And Janet just left the room. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
If people have questions and raise their hand, because I've asked, okay, we've done one of the things. What are the other 6 things you can do? So can you unmute people if they want to make a suggestion?
I cannot. They have to unmute themselves. So if they move they mouse over the bottom of the screen, they should see the microphone icon and be able to click on that and then start speaking.
Okay, cool. And I see Bob is unmuted. Bob, do you have a suggestion of what else is going to keep you out of a nursing home? Yeah, maybe you can't hear me. Okay, I'll give you one.
Hayner, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you, Jim. What would be
Good.
your
my question is a little discussion of death with dignity right now is something I'd like to understand.
Thank you. That is a very good question and a very difficult one. My beloved late husband was a retired physician and was a volunteer for, it's called End of Life Washington, and it's the Death with Dignity law. In this state, if you have done all your documentation and you go through a very lengthy process, you have to prove that you're not depressed, that you're cognitively intact. You have to have 2 different physicians certify that you are terminal, which is usually defined as within 6 months of death. You have to make a written request, and then you have to repeat part of that whole procedure, like I think it's 10 days later or something, make sure that you haven't changed your mind. And there are people that can help you with this process. Betty Herman in Paulsville is one of the volunteers. She's very capable. She's a geriatric care manager for many, many years. Yeah. And to just understand the process and see if you qualify. Very few people actually qualify and go through the whole process and take the medication. Sometimes people qualify and go through the process, but they aren't ready for the medication. They say, I'll wait. This is my little ace in the hole. Some people get the medication and then they don't take it. And the medication is very expensive, but they do have a scholarship. There's a fund for people who can't afford. I think it's like up to $3,000 or something really expensive. And it's also hard to find a pharmacy that will provide the medication, because at one time the prescribing pharmacy in Paulsville would do it, and then they chose not to do it anymore. And I believe now they have to go all the way to Olympia to get the medication. In the state, I don't know about last year, but the year before that, it was only like 32 people. So it's not used very often, and it's used by people who really, really want to use this because of uncontrollable pain or things like Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, or end-stage cancer. It's not the sort of thing you can use for end-stage dementia, which is a terminal diagnosis. A lot of times people don't think of Alzheimer's as a terminal diagnosis because people will live for 10 years. And like I said before, sometimes people have a really good quality of life at the end with dementia, and many people do not. So it's one of the things that's hard to predict. But thank you for that question, Jim. Did that answer your question? Yes, sir. You must be Dawn.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Jeanette.
Yes, my question is, I'm wondering if voluntary stopping eating and drinking, he said, has been clarified in nursing homes. Further, if I have an advanced directive which says that and voluntarily stop eating and drinking, will the nursing home support that?
Your audio is not coming through very well. Janet, did you hear what he said?
I did, but we have a chat box. If you look, I couldn't hear what you said. Your video, your audio wasn't clear, but there is a chat box. It's on the top right-hand side. It's a rectangular box with a little. If you could type your question in there, then we can answer. Jeanette can read it and answer it, or I could read it to you. So top right hand of your screen, there's a little box. It's rectangular. It's got 3 lines in it, and if you click on that, you can chat. You can write in your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure Jeanette will be able to answer that for you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. That was a good idea. And I'm happy to see so many people here I know. Julie Stone, hi, how are you?
How are you?
Good to see you. And I'm going to switch to a topic in which Julie is an expert, and then I will go back to Dawn's question, so don't let me forget. But one of the things that is going to keep you out of a nursing home is living in a home or community facility where you can age in place, where you can stay until you die. I'm in an accessible condo with an elevator, and I plan on going out feet first. And there are many aspects of universal design that a lot of us never even really think about. But you can solve almost every problem, especially if you consult somebody like Julie Stone with housing resources, because one of my friends, for example, she loves her home and they're very close to Linwood Center, and she doesn't want to move, and it's a very inaccessible home with 2 stories, and she's putting in an elevator, and that's one of the things you can do. You want to get rid of every threshold. You want to be able to get a wheelchair in your front door and into your bathroom, even if you're never in a wheelchair. At some point, somebody in your friends or your family is going to be in a wheelchair, and a lot of times the thresholds are too high. You want a 0 change in height. For example, in my bathroom, it's just the tile is slanted towards the drain, and so there's no barrier getting into the shower. And of course, there's grab bars and a handheld shower head that can go up or down. There's a place to sit, and it's very easy access. So having an accessible home and preventing falls and fractures, which is part of having an accessible, well-designed home for aging in place. That's one big factor that's going to keep you out of a nursing home. Dawn, did you come up with your question?
Sorry, I can't figure out how to type it in. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just repeat it if that's all right. I'm wondering if I have in my advanced directive that I want to be able to implement voluntary stopping eating and drinking, they said, and I'm living in a nursing home, if they will respect that. I know that they are obliged to offer food, whether that means even just putting a spoon up to my mouth and triggering a response, even though my will and my direction is something else.
That's a very good question. And the terrible answer to this is it depends, because different facilities have different rules. One thing that does preclude that more or less is actually being on hospice. because if you are in any kind of skilled care facility, they will be cited for an infraction of the regulations if you start losing too much weight. And so unless you're on hospice, they are going to make you eat. I'm not kidding. When I was a hospice volunteer for over 10 years, and I remember being in a nursing home with a woman who was in very late stage dementia. She couldn't get up out of her wheelchair. She couldn't talk. She couldn't really communicate. And they were spoon feeding her, and she would open her mouth like a baby bird. And I said, oh, she's not really hungry. That's just stimulus response. And the reply of the aide really went home to me, because she said, what's stimulus response? And, you know, it's so tragic that she didn't understand the situation. And she was giving responsible, loving care as best she could. But if it was me, I wouldn't want to be spoon fed like a baby bird. So you have to really question the facility, or you have to avoid altogether going in a nursing home. So even if you have a very accessible home and a very supportive community, which is part of aging in place, and all your documentation, what's another thing that's going to keep you out of a nursing home, you guys? What's another thing? And you can write it. The chat box is up in the upper right-hand corner. It's just a little square. That's probably a good way to do it. Because there's a couple of things that even when I present to very well-informed, large groups, well-educated, there's one thing that people often forget, and I'll tell you what that is. And Bob, you might want to mute your speaker because we're hearing you rumble around. One of the things that is really going to keep you out of a nursing home, and this was very hard for me to admit when I realized it, is money. Money. Rich people do not wind up in nursing homes. Doctors don't wind up in nursing homes. Bill Gates is not going to wind up in a nursing home. His dad did not wind up in a nursing home. And I came of age in the 60s where money was certainly not the top of my list and many of my friends. I mean, I was in Vista, which is like AmeriCorps. I was in the Peace Corps, and I was in grad school for years and years and years. And I was in voluntary poverty for many, many years and hadn't saved a nickel. And when I started working at Community Services for the Blind, which was how I found this path of working with older people and felt I needed to do it, I could tell that the people who were blind and visually impaired were functioning independently, often working, raising families, having a wonderful life. But people who were old and visually impaired and poor, especially single women, were really in trouble. In this country, we don't have a very robust safety net. And one of the things that I saw in older women that kept the wolf from the door was owning their own home. Excuse me. And so I started saving for a house. But so starting, even when you first have a real job, putting money away in whatever kind of retirement plan they have is way more important than I ever thought it would be. It's absolutely crucial. It's a hard thing to tell young people. When I give this lecture, like to grad students, they never come up with money. That's just not at the top of their list, and they're going to be saddled with huge debt the rest of their lives. But so I think that knowing that you have money is good. Dawn, what's your question?
Well, continuing with what Viv said for another minute, you mentioned the fact that if I was in a nursing home and I had hospice, that they would be the directors of my care, including whether I was taking in food or not. But when I contacted a hospice program and said, will you admit me if the reason for my call is that I'm going to be beginning voluntary stopping and eating and drinking, and their response was, yes, but only after the third day. If you call us on day one, we will start the admitting process, but we can't admit you until day 3 unless you have a diagnosis that will that you're going to die from within 6 months. Am I making myself clear?
Not exactly. And one of the things is different hospice and different long-term care facilities have different rules. Because, for example, Providence, which is one of the biggest healthcare systems in the country, and which just accepted billions of aid, they do not honor death with dignity. That's part of their belief system. And so if you were in a Providence long-term care facility, and this is an interesting question because I did a lot of my research in Mount St. Vincent, which is Providence, Sisters of Providence in West Seattle, and that is an exemplary skilled care facility. They really went all out to do culture change, broke it down into small neighborhoods with a little kitchen and TV watching area and sort of like a community. They gave residents choices, like most nursing homes, when it's breakfast time, they get you up at 6 a.m. and have you dressed and sitting in your wheelchair in the dining room for another hour until the first shift comes on. And at the Mount St. Vincent, you can have breakfast whenever you want, and you can have it wherever you want. You can have it in the dining room, in the cafeteria, in your room, in your little central kitchen in your neighborhood. I mean, it's a whole different paradigm of providing long-term care, and I do think they are a national model. And it was so disappointing to me because I did one paper there 25 years ago when they started this culture change. Then I did another one 25 years later to see how well it has worked, and it worked brilliantly. And then I went to a national conference on long-term care, and it's still one of very few communities that have this culture change model. One of the ones that's mentioned in the article, and I'll send the URL to read so he can put it in a newsletter, but the idea of greenhouses, where you have small, like maybe 6 bedrooms around a central dining, living, kitchen area, and you have your own room. I mean, sharing a room, that's just nuts. And so I think, or I hope, that we will learn from this horrible situation with the coronavirus just decimating nursing homes. But it certainly, I think, is a strong message. It's a lesson that we need to learn, that we need to change our long-term care system. But it also then really helps us realize how important it is to avoid that, to avoid going into a nursing home. So far we've got money, we've got universal design, a great place to live in a supportive community. What else? We've got money.
Exercise.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Janet. I think one of the most important things you can do is have a healthy lifestyle. And when I was teaching, one of the things I would teach is the 3 most important things you can do to stay out of a nursing home are exercise, exercise, exercise. Because staying healthy is really important, and you do have control over that. And for example, they've even got data now. One of the only things they found that can lower your risk of Alzheimer's is exercise, both muscle mass and cardiovascular. And that's also makes your immune system more robust, so that you are less likely, for example, to get the coronavirus. And you have to find things that you enjoy doing and can do on a regular basis. Because, for example, lots of us aren't athletic. I mean, I never, ever enjoyed playing team sports because if one side wins, then the other side has to lose. But going to the gym, weight training, walking with friends, anything you could do, and to do it on a regular basis where you really make sure that you get out and walk every day. Having a dog is a great form of exercise, I'll tell you that. And there is data that people who have dogs have lower mortality and morbidity. They live longer with less disease. So yay, dog owners. So besides exercise, what else goes into this huge basket of healthy living? What else goes in this category?
Jeanette?
Yes.
I don't know. Can you hear me, Jeanette?
Yes, Julie. Hi.
how about care management to keep you at home? Getting help from outside care management to help you stay at home and transition. Hard to predict how many needs you'll have.
Yeah, no, thank you, because finding home care is really, really, really hard. Fortunately, here on the island, we have island volunteer caregivers, and while they won't do personal care like bathing or toileting, we still do have this wonderful volunteer service that helps with transportation and grocery delivery and getting to doctor's appointments. I mean, they have volunteers. They have the most wonderful volunteers. They would take you to Seattle for your chemo therapy and then get you home again. So Island Volunteer Caregivers is a wonderful resource, and not every community has that. So on Bainbridge, we have a very good network of nonprofits to help people. But finding home care, oh my gosh, my dad had late stage Alzheimer's and was living at home because it was familiar to him and he was still a master of his environment. And so he had a former neighbor that somebody we all knew and liked and trusted. Oh my God, he started giving her my mother's jewelry and she would accept it. She bought round trip tickets to Paris for both of them on his credit card. It was like,
Oh my
you
God.
never know what's going to happen. I can't tell you. I can tell you a lot of stories, but that's mine to tell. And so I can share that. But, home caregivers, there's advantages and disadvantages to going through an agency. Because, for example, an agency is going to charge probably 3 times as much as that caregiver is making. So if that caregiver is making minimum wage, you're going to be charged like $50 an hour for that person. And there are a lot of restrictions there's a minimum number of hours, and it's a very complex field, and we don't have a lot of good options here on the island. Many of the caregivers are coming from Bremerton, and while right now there's not much traffic, up until the coronavirus, there was often a chance that it would take you 2 hours to get one way from Bremerton. So here's these caregivers spending a lot of time in their cars, and the agency or you are paying for that, or they're paying for it. So,
And Jeanette, I was also thinking some of the agencies are nonprofits, and they will come out and they will even separate the concept of just having a bath aid. Make sure you're safe and get through your routine a couple of times a week and limit services to one issue like that. I also was thinking, I wanted to ask you about care management. Seeing my dad who passed away from Alzheimer's, and knowing that his routine was managed was to some degree allowing him to be at home. If somebody ordered the medication, somebody checked on connecting medical appointments. So my opposing example in what I do, which is making modifications for folks at home, as seeing folks come home from nursing after convalescing or rehabbing to be totally swamped with the need to make phone calls just to make things happen, and it's exhausting. Definitely affects people's psyche and outlook and well-being, and so those things become really tough when you're not feeling well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have an advocate, to have a trained geriatric care manager, and there are a few on the island, and they are very good. And they're not cheap, but they aren't outrageous. So having a geriatric care manager is very helpful. most people wind up with a family member being their advocate and trying to organize all of these things. IVC is one organization where they can do some of that. They certainly can't do all of that. And a lot of it is, let's get everything set up in advance, so that, for example, medication management, our little local drugstore, the one over, we always say where Bainbridge Bakers used to be, whatever, the Village Green or whatever.
Green.
Village Green.
They will do a MediSet that is a push out system. So you can have a whole week's worth of medications on a card. So like on Monday, you can push out your pills for Monday and take them. And then you can look at that, and your caregivers or your family member can look at that and know you've taken your Monday medications.
Yeah.
And getting physicians to simplify your medications is a good idea too. A lot of times they'll put you on like, oh, you got to take this in the morning and this in the evening and this at midday. Don't do that. Just say, no, we're not doing that. That's too complicated. It's too easy to screw it up. Get off as many medications as you safely can too. I remember when my dad was on allopurinol, and then once we had control over his diet, it's a medication for gout, which is something you get when you drink and you eat a lot of meat. And so once we had real control of his diet, he didn't have that diagnosis anymore. But when he had his medications refilled, his caregiver would automatically pick up this medication and give it to him. And it's like, no. So get your medications minimized as best you can, and to once a day in a feasible way of dealing with your medications. Or for example, I think it's really good to have someone that helps with housework, having a helper, even when you don't need it. Like then when I had my hip replacement last year, I had somebody that I knew, that I trusted, that knew what to do. And so arrange as many things in advance, even if you don't think you'll ever need somebody to clean the house. I mean, a lot of women will say, oh, nobody can do it as well as I can. Well, just wait till you're 82 and have arthritis and you're trying to vacuum under the rug and, So if you can possibly afford some kind of housekeeping, I think that's a real benefit. There's a lot of home delivered services we don't even necessarily know about or think about. For example, fabric care picks up and delivers, and even laundry, but mostly like, something like annually getting your quilt cleaned because the washing machine isn't big enough, and things like that. And they'll pick up and deliver. And now, of course, we've got a lot of home delivered food, and Amazon is just going crazy, delivering everything to everybody in a day. I mean, if you've got Amazon Prime, I'm amazed. I'll order something and it's there the next day. So setting up robust systems. Also, minding your finances, making sure that you are not subject to scams, because I do know people who have made some very bad decisions, and there are some very skillful criminals out there that will help separate you from your money. So for example, here, I made sure I had a personal relationship with my bank, and I can walk in and they know me. Of course, I can't walk in anymore, but the fact that they have been told that they have permission to contact my fiduciary if they see unusually large withdrawals, so that I've got some oversight. Or some people have a joint checking account and credit account with their adult children, if they trust their adult children. I can tell you some horror stories there too, because it's a mantra in the School of Social Work that all families are dysfunctional. And so you need to have a safety net to guard your finances, just in case. I want to go back to the healthy living basket, just so we don't forget some of the really important things that go in that same basket. One is sleep, getting the right amount of sleep. People who sleep less than 7 hours a night on average have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's and other dementias. And we could talk for hours about Alzheimer's, but dementia is an umbrella term for all sorts of things. Brain deficits from traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's, Lewy bodies, stroke, Alzheimer's. sometimes, oftentimes, it's a combination of all of those. And I'm so sorry that the Alzheimer's conference was canceled this year, because they put on a great annual conference in Seattle every year. So maybe next year. But making sure that you do everything you can to live a healthy life, even if it isn't that much fun. So habit control, for example, alcohol, sugar, all those things we like, or things that I like. Don't smoke. A lot of these are no-brainers that you already know. But I think it's important to recognize that your overall health is crucial to staying out of a nursing home and mitigating the risk of dementia. So we just got a couple more topics, and we're going to run out of time here.
Can I make a quick plea?
Of course.
I just want to ask everybody, when they cannot quite reach for something or are thinking they will get to that stack of books or whatever material on the floor, to please stop and put on their grocery list or somewhere, take time to reassess my home.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
walk
You would
through-
do that too, Julie. You would do that. Help people assess
Absolutely, that's what we are here for.
Yeah, it's so hard to talk people out of those cute little throw rugs. Guilty. And things like that that are very hard to change and hard to part with. But really important, really necessary. I don't want to leave too little time for a very important topic that we haven't discussed, which is social support. And I think it's really fortunate to live in a community like Bainbridge, where we have so many book groups and a fabulous senior center and a world-class library and our fabulous museum, and these connections with friends and family. Because I did mention many families, all families are dysfunctional. It's just a question of degree and coping skills. But to have a robust social support network and to really cultivate that, like when you get a new neighbor in the neighborhood, welcome them and have some kind of community gathering. In my old neighborhood, when I lived in a house, that whole map your neighborhood safety plan for emergency planning, we'd have like a barbecue every year. And that was a really good tool for getting to know your neighbors. And we need to pay attention to have safety planning. And then here where I live now in a condo, we have the map your neighborhood, and each floor is a neighborhood. And so that floor is responsible for getting to know each other and keeping an eye on how people are doing, especially if they are very old or living alone. Julie, I shouldn't tell you this. I changed a light bulb all by myself yesterday up on a ladder, a really, really hard one. But I had my phone in my pocket. but don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, I got up on that ladder. I'm changing this. I'm thinking, boy, is this stupid. So really question your actions and nurture social support, and also be aware of what I call negative social support. If there's someone in your family or your immediate friends who bring you down, we all know somebody who doesn't listen. They just never stop talking. And you know, it's okay sometimes to, like on the phone, say, oh, I gotta go, I got a dentist appointment, even if you don't. Or to say to somebody like, Mom, I can't come for dinner this weekend, I made other plans. So I'm not saying dump on your friends or family, but I'm saying be aware that some people suck more out of you, that it's not a partnership. And that you might want to minimize that kind of stress. And again, I mentioned pets are very important. Gosh, living alone now, people who are stuck at home alone, the ones with pets are a lot happier, I'll tell you that. So social support is really important. Another topic that's, I think, absolutely crucial, and I think you guys inherently, intuitively know this, is having a life with purpose, having a life with meaning. And we all get that in different ways. some people do get that from their grandchildren or from their spiritual belief system. But especially here on the island, there are a lot of things. I mean, for me, for example, weed warriors doing native plant restoration, improving the environment is very important to me. Being a docent at Islandwood, which I really miss all my friends at Islandwood because they shut down, and that is a school in the woods for making sure that 4th and 5th graders have a really good science and nature and environmental education for 4 nights and 5 days. And it's so important. And I hope a lot of those organizations are able to come back when, we're opening up today. We're going to stage 2 today. The public health and the governor has announced that. But so having meaning, having purpose, not just having a good time, not just, well, I like to sew or I like to garden, having something that really has some substance and gives meaning to your life. I think that also is very important. I'm going to close with another one that's a little more controversial in a way, not to me and not to most of the people here, but having a peaceful, healthy planet. I mean, I feel so sorry for children today. They will never have the healthy planet that I had growing up. And we really have got global climate change now, and it's going to be hotter and drier. There'll be more horrible storms. The tides are rising. And to do everything we can to stop that and to educate children well so that they fix what we have wrecked. I think that also is very, very important. And to be proactive about that. It's very meaningful to work with children and help them understand the environment. It's kind of our only hope in many ways at this point, because it looks very serious. So what else? What else might you mention? Any of you? Questions?
Yeah, I just want to point out that Sheila made a comment in the chat box a while back. I don't know if you noticed it.
Oh, Sheila?
Yes, she put, so money, yes, but one can be too wealthy, but also not having enough money either.
Mhm.
Yes, no, it's a serious concern. And we have a lot of people just winding up in poverty when they never expected it. And I think that the Gates have done a very fine job of proactively sharing their wealth. I'm reading Melinda Gates' book called The Moment of Lift, where she goes all over the world helping women take control of their lives. It's a wonderful book. And they have given away millions and millions. So yeah, being generous and sharing the wealth, having an equitable tax system, I think that would be really helpful. One of the things, Scotland just got huge hits. Their nursing homes, they have had more deaths in their nursing homes than anywhere in the world. And it turns out that their system, their wonderful universal health care, not too long ago, one of the politicians decided to make it into a for-profit industry, nursing homes. And you cannot make a big profit from people who are frail and disabled and at the end of life and don't have much money. And they're being punished for it now. They've just got this huge load of deaths in both the residents and the workers in long-term care. In Scotland, I mean, like Scotland. Spain was very hard hit in the nursing homes as well. So I think it's important to really think about how greed is not the best way to run an economy.
The other thing, Jeanette, I'd like to point out is what has happened is that your husband gets dementia and he gets to a stage where you cannot continue to look after him, and he goes into a nursing home, which are extremely expensive, and you use all your money to take care of him, and unfortunately he dies, and you are left not only bereft of him, but you're left bereft of your opportunity to look after yourself after he's died. And I think we have to be mindful of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in this country, one of the things to keep in mind is there is a big legal difference between nursing homes, which are federally regulated as skilled care, and assisted living, which is more regulated by states. And so dementia care, or what they euphemistically call it, memory care, is really quite different from nursing homes. And they are almost all private pay. There's very few assisted living communities that take Medicaid. There are a few. Sisters of Providence Heritage House in the Pike Place Market is actually quite marvelous. And it's small, intimate, and the thing that's so important is for caregivers to know the person, to not just see them as this demented old person that they don't know. This was a father, this was an engineer, this was someone who worked in a floral shop. To really know the person and to have that personal relationship, I think is absolutely crucial. And you can have that more in assisted living. For-profit nursing homes really cut corners, and they have a lot of floaters so that they don't get cited for infractions for not having enough workers per resident. But then you get these total strangers in that don't know anything about the person who's there. So this whole idea of dementia care in assisted living is a pretty new phenomenon. And okay, I'm going to make one universal design architectural comment because it drives me crazy. And the facility I'm talking about shall remain nameless. But there is a body of literature, of research for designing for dementia. And it's not rocket science. It's when you exit your private room, which is also important, whether you turn left or right, you wind up in a dining room. And there's fresh fruit and cookies. And then when you leave the dining room, you wind up in front of your room, which has something to remind you that it's yours. Your wedding picture, pictures of your grandkids, something that says this is where you live. And so that's a circular design. And that's all there is to it. Whereas our local dementia facility, whichever way you turn, you wind up facing a locked door. So that's not a very good design. And they know it now, and they have very good training for their staff, and they do a good job on it. But they want a whole new building now, and they didn't do their homework. It's so important to do your homework. Have a prosthetic environment. One of the things about dementia, I'll just finish on this because this is something that's a dilemma. There's no answer. Well, many of these questions, there's no answer. But your long-term memory stays intact for years and years and years. People can remember songs, they can remember their wedding, they can remember how they met their husband, they can remember grade school, they remember World War II, but they have no idea what they had for breakfast. And so this long-term memory stays intact for a very long time, whereas short-term memory, we all know that feeling of, what was I going to look for in the refrigerator? You need to be able to recognize your environment, to be a master of it. So there are a lot of good reasons for just staying where you are in an environment that you are familiar with, or moving to some kind of congregate living situation where you'll have time to master the environment while you still are cognitively intact. But keep in mind, it's a minority of people who have dementia. So that's another consideration. And so there's no easy answer. It's a huge dilemma.
Thank you, Jeannette. Does anyone have any more questions? No, if you do, please raise your hand. Well, I want to thank you for coming today, because you have given us a lot to think about. Because one of the things I think will help is you can plan now and get your ducks in a row before you get to a situation where it's such a very fast decision you have to make in lots of areas, that I think it's a good idea. And I especially thank you for for you coming today and inspiring us to do that.